of D.B. Cooper. Now, he is the infamous airplane hijacker who jumped out of a plane back in 1971.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the shocking story of D.B. Cooper. With a bold request, a bag full of cables, and a fictitious name, they boarded an aircraft. D.B. Cooper is one individual that caused law enforcement to have restless nights for many years. Worst of all, until recently, nobody knew who he was. More than 50 years ago, D.B. Cooper was the America was unable to capture the ghost. Conspiracy theories were rampant, so it was just a matter of time before anyone would have found out. Now, 54 years later, D.B.'s real identity. Cooper is now known. What facts will come to light, and how was he discovered? Let's investigate. How in the world was it possible for one man to carry off a theft that left the authorities and Americans in shock? Frustrated with enforcement? With a relentless investigator and an enigmatic parachute, one man is implicated by all the evidence. At last, the truth is emerging. Let's go back to the beginning, though. The day before Thanksgiving was Thanksgiving Eve, 1971. 1971, people were hurrying to get home from the airport, and Flight 305 was just another nothing special or unusual, just a quick trip from Portland to Seattle. However, in the middle a man wearing sunglasses, a clip-on tie, and a black suit was on the verge of turning into row 18 and the cockpit. A straightforward journey into one of America's biggest unsolved mysteries. He identified himself as Dan Cooper. He wasn't just a regular person waiting in line for a quick trip. Northwest Orient Airlines Boeing 727, Flight 305, was only intended to be in the air for half an hour, and that's that. However, something occurred halfway through that brief voyage that nobody aboard could have foreseen it. As composed as ever, Cooper handed a handwritten note to the flight attendant. Thinking it was just another lonely person giving her his number, she smiled sweetly. She slipped it inside her pocket. Cooper leaned up close at that point and muttered something that permanently altered the course of American aviation history. "Miss, you'd better look at that message." She froze for a minute. "I have a bomb." Cooper had outlined his requests in the letter. $200,000 in $20 bills was what he sought. A gasoline truck and 4 parachutes were waiting on the Seattle runway, and if he didn't get it, he would blow up the entire plane. Furthermore, he didn't appear to be bluffing because when after hesitating, the flight attendant opened the briefcase just enough to show what appeared to similar to sticks of dynamite connected to a battery pack. The flight attendant nodded and seemed at ease, and approached the cockpit nonchalantly, as if she were making her routine rounds. She slipped into the cockpit and alerted William Scott, the pilot, who then notified the co-pilot and the pilot. They didn't know who they were dealing with at this time. Was this man formerly in the military? Was that an actual bomb? Was this a political ploy of some sort? The pilot radioed from that location in an air traffic control hijacking code that triggered ground-based alerts, and in a matter of minutes, this was now a federal case, and the FBI was informed. When Flight 305 touched down in Seattle, the FBI had hurried to get things done. The passengers were released from the aircraft without incident. They had recently participated in the most renowned hijacking in American history. Only a skeleton crew was on board when the money was delivered and the parachutes were turned over. Under Cooper's direction, the aircraft took off once more, this time going south toward Mexico. Then, as the rain blasted across Washington state's thick forests, somewhere at 200 miles per hour, the wind and the airplane howled, D.B. Cooper unlocked the back steps of around 8 p.m., the airplane took off and jumped. And he was gone in an instant. Just a second, D.B. Cooper was in seat 18C when he suddenly found himself plummeting through 10,000 feet of a bag of cash strapped to his chest, a pitch-black sky, and only the night to catch him. However, he was unaware that he had removed his clip-on tie prior to jumping. The crew had nothing when they landed the plane in Reno. Somewhere over the dense wood, Cooper had leaped. Forests in southwest Washington, close to the Washougal River, and the FBI was unsure of where to start. The search was underway by dawn. Hundreds of agents, troopers from the state, paratroopers, helicopters, bloodhounds. They searched every available inch of the woodland. They looked everywhere. Tiny towns and riverbanks. However, not even a boot print was seen. Not even a scrap of cloth. Not they could even identify him from a broken twig. The man appeared to have vanished into the trees. To exacerbate the situation, the media misreported one important detail: his alias. The Dan Cooper was the name on his boarding permit. However, when the news began to circulate, the hijacker's name had been misspelled, and suddenly Dan became DB, and DB Cooper adhered to one other like adhesive. Every tip was investigated by the FBI. Above investigations were conducted on 1,000 suspects. On his deathbed, one man even admitted. However, it was discovered that he was merely lonely and in need of attention. The DNA that was gathered, none of the samples of handwriting, and not even the ransom bills produced any reliable leads. Except for one, that is. An simple camping vacation ended up being a game-changer for the FBI, as a strong lead eventually led to the case being reopened almost 10 years later. When the drama had subsided a little after 9 years, an 8-year-old kid camping with his family discovered an odd object buried in the Columbia River's sand. It included 3 bundles of $20 bills that were still bound in spite of being rotten and sun-damaged. Rubber bands. They reported it to the police since they thought it was strange, and following several inquiries, after investigating the matter, the FBI verified that the banknote's serial numbers were accurate. Similar to the one they had agonizingly looked for and found in the man's bag. This was a lead. And reopening the case was most likely sufficient. It was Cooper's first and only tangible hint. Abandoned. Additionally, it posed more queries than it resolved. Did he pass away in the autumn? And the funds went down the river? Or did he install it there merely to cause trouble for the federal government? The FBI remained tenacious and intensified the inquiry once more. The Tena Bar area was searched by the crews. Forensic analysts looked for hints in the money while divers searched the Columbia River. But they had nothing at the end of it all. No equipment, no parachute, nothing. Cooper was nowhere to be found. 3 crusty bundles of $20 were discovered by a small boy and countless new questions that remain unsolved. The case was still technically open in spite of this. The FBI maintained it as a active but cold case for many years. However, by 2016, after considering every possibility, the FBI ultimately chose to formally close the case, making it one of the most significant unresolved crimes in American history after 45 years. Even though the path may have been abandoned, someone was still planning to blow it up somewhere. The unexpected discovery when the feds were searching through and by searching for hints that can ultimately lead them to the identity of D.B. Cooper actually was, behind the scenes, another man was conducting his own research. Dan Grider, a former captain of a commercial airline with more than 24,000 flying hours, is a YouTuber that discusses flying airplanes and other interesting topics on his channel. He showed interest in the DB, which was not surprising. Cooper case, and even after the FBI gave up on it, he couldn't seem to let it go for some reason. He studied FBI files, wind speeds, topographical maps, and flight logs for years that most people didn't even knew about it. He dissected parachute models, reenacted jump situations, and reviewed all of Cooper's escape specifics. Not for fame or clicks, but because he truly thought he could figure it out. Additionally, in 2023, after half a century after the notorious skyjacking, something that would raise the hairs on the back of your neck was dropped by Dan. Dan went to a dusty storage facility in Utah based on a gut feeling. A woman had previously owned the unit. Has connections to Richard Floyd McCoy Jr.'s family, whose name had surfaced in D.B. Cooper circles for many years, but it had never stayed. Most believed it to be another dead end. Dan, however, had discovered something. This was going to alter the course of the FBI's the entire nation, and even Dan believed he was aware of Cooper. Dan discovered a parachute hidden beneath piles of books and souvenirs in that abandoned unit. Not just any parachute, either. It just matched the description that Cooper had asked for. This was an ancient military-style equipment with odd modifications that matched certain information from FBI records from 1971. However, that's where the parachute originated. Made Dan's spine tingle. The unit was directly connected to McCoy, who was only 5, used the exact same strategy to hijack a plane months after Cooper's disappearance. At that point, Dan was aware that the two incidents were not coincidental. The only thing that tied was this parachute. Two unresolved crimes with startling accuracy. And all of a sudden, McCoy was no longer merely a footnote. He was the leading candidate. Since that parachute should have been perhaps, just possibly, they were the same individual all along if it came from McCoy to Cooper. Dan's next discovery wasn't just another hint. It was a secret that was concealed in plain view. Had the ability to alter our understanding of the most fabled mystery in American history. However, the primary component concealed in view that it was essential for everyone to learn Richard McCoy's true identity. Who was he? Additionally, why does he consistently appear in strange areas within the D.B. Cooper case? Richard McCoy Jr. If you put Richard McCoy Jr.'s resume in writing without any background, you may assume he was taken directly from a patriotic Hallmark film. Born McCoy was a helicopter pilot, a decorated Vietnam War veteran, and a devoted Mormon who grew up in Utah. Pilot who entered combat areas and survived to return home. In addition, he was a family man. Because he was married, had children, and was pursuing a law degree at the time of his arrest. University of Brigham Young. He was quiet, well-religious, and courteous, according to his neighbors. To everyone around him, McCoy appeared to be the epitome of the American dream in a tidy uniform. Nobody anticipated what lay behind that flawless exterior, as 5 months after D.B. Cooper McCoy performed the same thing, but louder this time, before vanishing into folklore. The date was April 7, 1972. In Denver, McCoy got on United Airlines Flight 855, wearing a business suit and carrying a briefcase. He didn't yell. He remained calm. Similar to Cooper, he calmly told a flight attendant that he had a bomb after handing her a note. Next came the requests for a refueled aircraft, 4 parachutes, and $500,000 in cash, all set to go to San Francisco. Does that sound familiar? As if he had studied the plan, McCoy carried it out. by line. He gave the pilots the command to lift off once more after the ransom was provided. And like the ghost before him, he leaped somewhere over Utah. The FBI was taken aback. It was familiar, but with more funds, greater accuracy, and one significant distinction: they succeeded this time. McCoy committed one major error, two, actually. Initially, in the cockpit, he left a handwritten note. It's not the sort of thing that shouts professionalism. Secondly, a glass of water in flight had his fingerprints on it. Within days, the FBI was able to link those prints to McCoy. They located him in his Provo house, Utah, where he and his family were simply relaxing at home as if nothing had occurred. Questions started to surface after he was arrested. What makes a man like that, a husband, a soldier, a pupil, risk all for such a daring and perilous crime? Why did his hijacking appear to be the Cooper case, like a carbon copy? Investigators were chilled by the uncanny resemblance. The identical Boeing 727 model, the identical rear stairwell parachute escape, and the identical serene manner, the same exchange of notes. There were strange similarities even in the wording of the two hijack notes. It didn't merely have a similar appearance, it seemed staged. Many were left wondering if this man was merely a replica of the original D.B. Cooper. However, what if Richard McCoy did more than simply imitate D.B.? The way of Cooper? What if he was D.B. Cooper from the beginning? Investigators would be plagued by that question. Fuel conspiracy ideas and cause decades of disagreement among professionals. And if you believe that McCoy is the end of it all, handcuffed, you might want to reconsider, though. You would believe that when Richard McCoy was taken into custody, that the FBI would have made the connection right away. Two hijackings that happened 5 months apart, almost same in execution, tone, and style, so naturally, it seemed as though they were carried out by the same individual. Surprisingly, however, the Bureau quickly disproved that idea. Officially, they asserted D.B. couldn't have applied to McCoy Cooper due to the fact that their faces, motivations, and, above all, a physical description that differs greatly from what the witnesses said. The Cooper case's witnesses spoke of a man in his mid-40s with olive skin and brown hair. Skin. McCoy was 29 years old, fair-skinned, clean-cut, and had lighter hair. Additionally, when Cooper was wearing McCoy's attire on the day of his heist was more business casual, consisting of a suit and sunglasses. More at ease. Not to mention the somewhat different language of the notes they passed, and not to mention the many handwriting styles. The FBI closely examined those distinctions and left with the conviction that McCoy was a replica rather than the original. However, that could have simply been a significant error, as it could be disclosed if we delve deeper into the specifics of what was found. Perhaps these discrepancies might have just been a conscious attempt to deceive or influence the federal government. Consider it. McCoy received military planning training. He was able to function well under duress and know how to meticulously organize a goal. Wouldn't it make sense to change his appearance if he were Cooper? As he becomes older, first time, then appear entirely different the next time? What about the note? The modified language, anyone can alter their handwriting, so come on, the handwriting alteration that may have been part of the strategy, if they so choose. A method to circumvent the law enforcement just enough to keep up with the times. The more Dan Grider examined the proof, the more these distinctions began to resemble camouflage. Put simply, tactics. The entire situation became personal at that point. Because there was more to this than a man and a no longer parachute. Furthermore, it didn't appear that McCoy was just concealing something. The individuals who had endured years of quiet were now his family. They may have been keeping a secret, so it seems like they knew more than they ever disclosed. Burdensome, it influenced all aspects of their lives. Something had been triggered by Dan's investigation. Deeper than chilly statistics and outdated pictures. This is where the truth is now revealed. Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. S. family secrets to the world was a devoted spouse, a loving parent, a man of faith, and a military hero. However, behind closed doors, a new tension subtly pulsed within the cramped confines of his Utah house. Not one of silence, yet one of confession or fear. Additionally, as we've learned from tales like this, quiet does not necessarily imply that there is nothing to say. Following the successful takeover of Flight 885, and Richard McCoy received a 45-year prison sentence after being apprehended. However, 2 years later, he plotted an escape with a few other prisoners in the Pennsylvania prison, and ultimately climbed onto a garbage truck and drove away. But 3 months later, their luck ran out, and they were discovered. Down. Richard managed to grab a gun and began shooting, which resulted in a gunfight between him and FBI officers, which ultimately resulted in his demise in 1974. Therefore, it was absurd to believe that the supposed parachute used by D.B. the Cooper and Richard storage might have been the identical one. Knowing that, Dan Grider discovered the parachute stashed deep within a storage locker. Connected to McCoy's kin, he sought more than just clarification. So he began to make contact. Initially, to McCoy's offspring. Emails. Letters. Messages were sent between contacts. However, the answer remained constant: nothing. Nothing. There was quiet, not even a courteous no. Grider initially believed it to be resistance. But eventually, he understood it wasn't rage. Or refusal. They seemed to be attempting to safeguard something. These were not human beings. Attempting to keep the world from knowing the truth. They were attempting to protect themselves against, if it ever came out, what might happen to them. Additionally, just as it appeared that this mystery was as human as it could be, Grider discovered something more. Not just the family was involved. Concealing something. Something else was present. Something hidden away from a file, in a closet, not